My name is John Shawnamonico. I am an associate partner here at NewSchools Venture Fund, where I'm helping to lead our work in the Gen AI and math tutoring space. Beforehand, I worked in Connecticut for their governor's office and State Department of Education, where we launched the first state's high-dosage tutoring program in math. I started out my career as a high school math teacher, teaching grades 9 to 12. So this work, this conversation is very near and dear to my heart. And I want to share a fact that I've been thinking about recently in preparing for this panel. And that is, today there are about 40 states that have passed legislation requiring instructional supports for schools under the Science of Reading framework. But when it comes to math, there have been less than 10 states that have passed analogous legislation. Today, around half of schools have some type of instructional support for reading, whereas that's true for less than a quarter of schools in math. And overall, the ecosystem around math education is less developed. There's less research and a body of scientific research specifically. There are fewer evidence-based assessments. Teachers report feeling less confident and prepared in the education space when it comes to math, and less students are being screened for math learning disabilities. Let's be clear, this imbalance is not due to a lack of challenges in math education. We do have those. Only 39% of fourth graders scored proficient or above on the latest math NAEP exam. And for fourth graders, that drops to 28%. And if we were to look exclusively at students furthest from opportunity, those numbers would be even smaller. So, why, as a country, have we made such progress at the policy level, at the research level, at the curricular level, in coalescing around a shared vision for what science of reading and reading instruction should look like, while neglecting to do the same for math? Why is it, if you ask a random person on the street what dyslexia is, odds are they'll tell you that it's a disability of reading and writing? But if you ask that same person what dyscalculia is, which is a math learning disability, they will return likely with a blank stare. And how is it, if we can't agree or find agreement on the best way to teach math education, how are we supposed to answer newer, more emerging questions around things like, what role does Gen AI play in math education? Or, since we're here in California, what role should topics like data science play in secondary math education? And even if that means de-emphasizing things like advanced algebra and calculus. There's a lot to talk about here, right? And even if we had 3 hours to talk about all of these questions, I think we'd still be scratching the surface. But there is one big question that I would like us to attempt to solve today. And that is, what would it take for math education to spark a movement, to one that matches the urgency and the clarity that we've seen around the reading movement? Today, we've assembled a panel of experts and practitioners in math education from across the country. I'm really excited for them to introduce themselves momentarily. We're going to be talking about some of the cleavages that we've seen in math education. We're going to be talking about what's bubbling at the policy and advocacy level in states as it relates to math education. And finally, we'll try to answer some of these questions around Gen AI and data science and the role that they're playing in traditional math classrooms. But to get there, I want to turn it over to our panelists to, first of all, introduce themselves and respond to the question that I posed earlier, which is this. What do we know is true today in math education, and what would it take through advocacy, through philanthropy, through policy, through research, through technology, to create a similar alignment of the stars, so to speak, in math as we've done in reading? And Jen, since you chose to sit directly next to me, maybe I can ask you to go first.
I'm introducing myself and answering that monster question.
The best that you can.
So hi, everyone. I'm Jen Alexander. I'm the Executive Director of the Policy Innovators in Education, or PI Network. We're a national voluntary membership organization of about just over 180, mostly state and local education policy organizations in 38 states and DC. So our members work at the state and the city level to try to shape policy, and we have some national policy partners. What would it take? Well, because I work in policy, I would say it would take some policy to change the critical kind of conditions for success. And then I know my friends on the panel are going to talk about this a little bit. I would say it's going to take cultural change too, because I think Shalini Sharma talks about this a lot, but no one would ever say to a child, you're just not going to be a reading person, or like, I'm just not a reading person, it's not my thing. But for some reason, we're okay saying, I'm just not a math person about ourselves. We're okay saying that to other people. And so I think we have to shift that, and then shift the conditions and tools and supports for educators to deliver.
Thanks, Jen. My name is Latrenda Knighten, and I'm from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I am currently the president of the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. We are the largest. That's right. Got some members out there? If not, I can help you with that. But we are the largest mathematics education organization for teachers, and the oldest. So we were founded in 1920. So, and prior to being president of NCTM, I taught for 32 years in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I taught, I coached, and I was the math supervisor before I thought smart enough to retire, but then, like the next month I was president, so I'm not sure if I did retirement quite right, but that's okay. I can retire 2 times, so I can have 2 celebrations. So I can think of it that way. John asked a powerful question that could have a lot of answers. I agree with Jen's response. But one thing I'd like to add to that is I believe part of our problem is a marketing problem. So think about how she ended that. She said, we all know this. This is the only content area that it is acceptable to say, I'm just not good at math. No one in my family was good at math. We see it in media, in books, all commercials, everywhere. It's acceptable. Someone who cannot read will never tell you they can't read. A 2-year-old will tell you they can read because they've memorized their book. But, it's okay to say, I don't know math. So I think that's part of the problem, is the marketing. Then also you have this impression, I learned it this way, so everyone else can learn it that way, right? Because I suffered through it, so we want everyone else to suffer through it as well. And so any of you who've attended a recent math conference, I've shared where a student actually pointed that out. They felt as if, well, she was a little bit more blunt about her response, is that we were kind of all old fogies, and we wanted kids to have the same suffering that we had, and that's why we wouldn't use new strategies. But I was like, that's a pretty perceptive child, so we need to think about that. So I think part of it is the marketing. And the reason I say that is because those of you who are members of NCTM, and I know there's some people out here who are former math teachers or might be current math teachers, you know that for many years, our story hasn't changed at NCTM. The things that we advocate for now, those strategies, we have been advocating for those for years. And so because the policies and the funding and things are not there to support getting that mass information out to everyone and really helping people be accepting that it's okay if we don't do Mad Minute anymore. Yes, we had, and some of you are like, I don't even know what that is. Go and Google it. I'm a lot older than some of you. That's how I was raised on Mad Minute. But, I think that's part of it as well. And I think we'll share some things with other questions about what are some specific things that I'm talking about that are out there. But I do believe it's the funding, it's the policy, and it's the marketing more than anything, because there are things there, but people just don't know about them.
We'll share. No. So thank you, Latrenda. I knew that I wanted to go after her because I knew she would say a bunch of the things that I wouldn't have to say because she said it for me. So I really appreciate that. I didn't expect, as we prepared for this panel, we had a lot of sort of agreement amongst us about some of the topics we were going to say. I didn't expect like my anecdote to be first told by you, though, at the very beginning. I was saving it up for the end. So anyway, I'm Kristen Umland. I'm the president of Illustrative Mathematics. And all right. And co-founder. And it's actually, I kind of got invited at the last minute. I think maybe they had a cancellation. I'm not sure. But in any case, no, I'm just kidding. It really is delightful to be on this panel with these amazing folks. So I appreciate being here. I'm going to speak a little bit about the research piece. We actually do know a lot about math teaching and learning. And at a very high level, we know that conceptual understanding and procedural fluency grow together. It's not one or the other, it's both, and it's both in an intertwined way. We also know that we want students to be able to apply the mathematics that they learn. And we know something about how to support student learning in this way. We know that a lot of mathematical learning is language mediated, which surprises some people. But it's also, there are other sort of really important mathematical representations that need to be used in strategic ways. And it's also very much a social learning process. I mean, mathematics is a cultural practice, and a lot of people forget that because it seems like, well, there's right and wrong answers, so somehow it has some transcendent reality. But in fact, mathematics is something that people invented, and mathematics from other, cultures, like the simple systems don't all look the same, and the concepts that are considered core concepts aren't always the same. So it's a cultural practice, and it's a human practice. I will say, though, that we don't have the kind of systematic and detailed knowledge we need about specific mathematics topics across different grade levels. I would say the sort of shining example that is different from that is early math learning, early number learning. We actually have decades of really high quality research. We have a whole community of researchers who've studied both sort of collaboratively and competitively to figure out the right ways of understanding how young children learn numbers. And I feel like that is an example that we need to repeat much more across the grade bands. So I have a little more to say about that, but I think there's really something about developing a shared research agenda across K-12 mathematics that we haven't really had the discipline to do historically in the way that we might in like the biological sciences or the physical sciences. And there's a real opportunity there to define what that should look like and sort of rally people around sort of a shared effort to understand what it really takes to teach students some of the deep, important problems that like maybe we don't know everything about.
So, not to steal any thunder, but in 2026, in October, we will be releasing that publication in CTM Will. And so we've done it before with pre-K-8, but because we know how important this is, so just mark your calendars, October 2026 in Denver, you will have a pre-K-12 document that looks at those big ideas in math that go all the way through with content and pedagogy.
See, I knew we were going to have all the...
What a friendly panel. All right. So it's nice to meet you all. My name's Arun Ramanathan. I'm the CEO of PowerMyLearning, and we're a pre-K through 5 math organization. We focus on both digital solutions and aligned professional learning, and IM is one of our wonderful partners. So, I think it's a great question because I actually ran a science of reading organization before I came to PowerMyLearning, and it was an organization that was actually not cool 8 years ago. And I think sometimes people forget that there was this stuff called Lucy Calkins, right? Actually a person, she's not stuff, like a human being named Lucy Calkins. There were other folks like Fountas and Pinnell, right? And I was actually trained in the whole language way of teaching reading. And which to great detriment of my students, I was a special educator. And also I worked with kids with, sorry, I have no idea who's calling me.
It's Lucy.
It's so it is. Her ears were burning. That was good. All right. Yeah, it wasn't actually cool 8 years ago to teach the science of reading, and so there was actually a pretty structured but entirely bottom-up movement that brought science of reading from the margins into the front of how we teach reading in public schools. And I could actually track this by the books that my wife, who's still a teacher, brought home. She's an elementary teacher, right? Like we had Fountas and Pinnell books. We had books on doing running records. We had all of those different books. And I'd walk in and they'd be sitting, in our sunroom. Now I see Haggerty. I see books from the company that I used to lead, Core Learning. And all of these are a sign of how fundamentally pedagogy changed on the reading side. But there were a number of different ways that happened, right? And it was a slow process that required, one, a fact, and I think this is the most important part, and this gets to what you were saying around research, a real sense around the research that the pedagogy that we were previously using was, the whole language pedagogy was harmful to children, right? The other aspect of it was legislative, right? Like all of these states started passing laws, starting with Mississippi, Colorado, Florida, and that movement spread all over the place. And then it started moving into products and publishers, right? So those all happened at the same time, but there was another part of that was also really important, was the sense and understanding among parents that what was happening in classrooms was not the right thing for kids. And that's, I think, where I'm going to start here. Because the first thing that I think people don't know about math in the early grades is that math scores tend to lag reading scores by about 10 to 15 points in state assessments, right? And so one of the first things that I think that we need, if we really want to have a movement, is a sense of urgency and a sense of focus, right, around early grades math. And the same sense of urgency and focus that we had around what happens if you do not do early grades reading right for kids, right? What happens if you don't do reading right by third grade? Where does the trajectory of children go? What the research says very clearly is it's similar for math, right? Now, there's a whole set of questions that I know we're going to explore later on what you would need to do to shift structures so you can focus more on math in the early grades. But I think that's where we really have to start. What's happening isn't the right thing for kids. And then we think about where to go from there.
Thanks, Arun. I'm going to come back to you in a second because I did want to continue on that thread. My first question, or I guess second question, though, is I want to pose to Latrenda and Kristen, which is around the so-called math wars. And there's been a lot of math wars out there, right? But the one that I want to focus on is the one that you both briefly talked about, which is finding the balance between procedural learning, right? So knowing how to solve a quadratic equation versus conceptual learning, right? Understanding what the solutions are, what they mean, why they're important. So I was a high school math teacher. I found tension between these two pedagogical techniques. What should the balance be between the two? I understand that it's both and, but we have limited time in the classroom. Where should teachers be spending most of their time? And is there still a place for strategies like timed test, like step-by-step instruction, like repeated practice, like memorization in math learning? Latrenda, do you want to start?
Sure. That's the question of the day. So we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, that's for sure. But we have to think about this. How many of you had a point in time, maybe recently in your adult life or as a child, that you had to memorize something for a test, and that was the only way to learn it? If you had to recall it the next week, did you know it? If you had to recall it sometimes the next day. So we have research that tells us that does not work. Our goal is to create students who are mathematically literate. We need them to be able to use mathematics in meaningful ways in their lives and to have choices. And in order to do that, we have to start by building conceptual understanding. And so where should your time be spent? Based on the student's grade level, because students should all sit in classrooms where they're exposed to grade level mathematics. They should have an opportunity to build new concepts from conceptual understanding. And from there, they will become procedurally fluent. And so when we talk about the research, as Kristen talked about, we have research that goes far, far back. But I'm going to only go back to 2001. For a National Research Council report, it was called Adding It Up. You can find it linked in a million places. Some of your very states have it actually listed in their state standards. And you probably have seen the graphic that shows this, where it shows an intertwined rope. And it identifies 5 strands that are important for mathematical proficiency. Conceptual understanding and procedural fluency are both those strands, along with 3 others, but they're intertwined because it's important that you have a combination of both. But research tells us that if you don't build that foundation from conceptual understanding, students are not going to get to the point where they are procedurally fluent. And that goes back to Arun's comment, is we have to put the investment in early mathematics, because what happens in elementary school does build a foundation for what they're going to do in middle school, what they're going to do in high school. And this is all about providing choices for students. If students are robbed of the opportunity to have that rich education in those early grades, that immediately eliminates some of their choices later. And that's not what we want to do. I know we have limited time, so I want to give Kristen a chance to respond.
Well, you already laid the foundation for what I want to say. I mean, I think it is actually not true that we're in the middle of a math war, because I lived through the math war a couple decades ago, and this is not that. I mean, it's definitely, there's a lot more general agreement, at least at the sort of math educator level, about what, you know, good math instruction looks like. I think part of the problem, it's a marketing problem, it's a cultural problem, and also it's just it's an understanding what it means to be mathematically proficient. Like, not everybody holds the same understanding of what mathematical proficiency looks like. And so it's hard if you don't know what it looks like, it's hard to know how you cultivate it. But I will say that I think there is ample evidence that students need to make sense of mathematics before they try to do mathematics, because that's what allows for that sort of robust long-term retention and the ability to recall and apply those ideas later. It needs to be part of a complex conceptual network. Procedural fluency is built entwined with those ideas. And I mean, I think the other thing is, to your questions, are there places for time tests and those sorts of things? I think that, to me, that's an empirical question, where those are valuable, that maybe we haven't sort of systematically studied in the way we should. But it is true that we want to start with sense making. So, like, you want students to understand and make meaning of multiplication before you ask them to consolidate and apply it. I mean, that just makes sense. And so and again, I'd like to go back to my first point, which is, you know, we could do a lot more and better research to look at the exact balance, but it's an empirical question, and we need to take an empirical stance towards it, rather than a sort of like a political or a war type stance, like, well, I'm right and you're wrong, this is how I've always done it. It's just like, no, we should be open to, like, what does the research tell us, and we should be doing that research. I just want to say one more thing, which is, I think, and this is something that I came to much later in my life to really truly appreciate, is the really important role of mathematical identity. And I'm going to just tell a little quick story. I went to a very progressive / hippie school in Northern California for elementary school. And I remember first grade, I was sitting in a beanbag, doing my math, the sun streaming in, working in my workbook, working at my own pace. And my teacher came by and she said, "Let me take a look at what you're doing. And she said, "Oh, look at you, you've moved very quickly. We're gonna have to open a high school just for you." And at that moment, I'm just like, I'm a math person, right? Like, she came by and she said that thing. It was this little thing, but I remember it so clearly. And Not every student believes they can be a math person because not every student has the opportunity and the support they need. But every student can be a math person. And we want to move away from people saying, I'm not a math person, but it doesn't come through timed tests. You don't develop that through that sort of a thing. You develop mathematical identity through sense making and through supporting students' ability to believe they can do mathematics. And that requires a different way of thinking about it than just, can you get the right answer on a time test? So yes, maybe there is some place for that, but we have to be very specific about where that belongs, and we know that it's not the whole story by any means.
The only thing I wanted to add to Kristen's response, and we couldn't have set it up perfectly, she mentioned about identity. There is so much more research that shows us that students are also students, not the parents, not the teachers. The students are demanding to have relevance. They want to know, how does this connect to what I'm going to do in the real world? But that's part of that sense making. So even for a kindergartner, it needs to make sense. And that's one of those 5 strands of proficiency, is that students understand the utility of mathematics. So they have to see themselves as learners and doers of mathematics. They have to be engaged in that sense making, and they have to be able to make those connections between concepts and build on them as they get new concepts added.
Thank you both. Arun, I want to bring you in onto this question around math identity. You know, the theme for this conference is courage, commitment to deliver. And I say this with a slight tongue-in-cheek, but I think for some students, walking into a math classroom is in and of itself an act of courage. At least that was the case in my math classroom, I remember. What would it take to, especially for those students furthest from opportunity, to dismantle that, both instructionally, culturally, from a marketing perspective, and to build students' confidence early in math?
So I don't think it's the job of students to do that. I think it's the job of adults, right? And again, I think this gets back to the, equity, I guess, has become a bad word, but it,
no, we here.
Yeah, so in some places. But the essence here is that we first have to start with the equity issue, right? Which is that, again, if you look at the assessments, 70% of students in our state are not on grade level in mathematics, right? If you disaggregate that data, it's going to show much more significant issues for Latino students, Black students, students with disabilities, and other marginalized groups. That data, by the way, is much more available and prevalent in reading than it is in mathematics. The second thing is that the infrastructure to support kids who are falling behind, and I want to appreciate my good friends from Ed Solutions, because they've done some of the great research in this area. The infrastructure just does not exist at the elementary school level, right? You walk into an elementary school and you will typically see a reading specialist. Sometimes you'll see a reading specialist for, in every grade level, right? You will see ELD teachers. You will see what I used to be, an early grades special education teacher, right? My entire focus was on reading and kids falling behind in reading. So what we actually need to start thinking about doing for the kids who are falling behind, maybe we don't recreate the same structures, maybe we rethink those structures, but what do we do to support them with more adults, right, and more focus on adults? And what that means is actual differences in resource allocation, right? Why can't there be a math specialist in every school? Why would we not start thinking, again, about these processes that are deeply embedded? Some of them, by the way, don't work. Like, how would we think about kids falling behind? What is the RTI process for that, right? What is the MTSS process? We simply don't think that way and structure that way on the elementary grade sides. It even gets to these issues of screeners. There are very, very few validated screeners for early grades math, and there are very few actual validated dyscalculia screeners, right? So again, we don't need to recreate some of the bad aspects of those structures, right? What we do need to think about, though, is if I have got an elementary school, how am I going to structure it so that the teachers can support students in Tier 1, right? Every student in Tier 1, and any student that's falling behind, figure out a way, one, how to increase the support for Tier 1 for that child, but also to utilize all of those other supports that you could create. That's, I think, where the adults need to go.
Yeah. So Arun, you mentioned screeners. Jen, I want to bring you in because I know you've done some work around this. You and I have both worked in Connecticut. We both know that Connecticut is a state that is highly dependent on an educated workforce, especially one in math, because of its growing sectors in advanced manufacturing, IT, and finance. Let's say you're advising a legislator or a governor or a state department of education who is interested in doing more around math, in trying to increase math scores, become a stronger math educational state. What are some of the things you're thinking about in terms of advising them on policy development? Where do you see momentum right now in this political ecosystem? Where do you see barriers? And maybe also share a little bit more about the resources that are on the tables right now from USA, as well as what I'm going to put on the slideshow right now.
Okay, so the first thing I would say, if I were going to talk to a policymaker, red, blue, purple, doesn't matter, is voter polls consistently show, again, across red, blue, and purple states, that the number one thing that voters want to see and that parents want to see schools deliver on is, can students read and can they do math? And that's like across political parties, across geographies. And so if you policymaker want to kind of meet voters where they are and help deliver on the promise of schooling, prioritize these two things. And then the second thing I would say is that there is a group, and I think it's up on the slide, we brought together last fall, and I think Arun was part of that group, and I see Maya Martin-Cadogan, who's our board chair. Her group was part of that work. We brought a broad, cross-partisan, cross-ideological group together, and one of the things they said was we should identify, you know, if we knew NAEP scores were going to come out, this was before they'd come out, we knew they probably weren't going to be great. In advance of that, let's prepare a set of recommendations for a policymaker based on what knowledge we have about what works and what doesn't work. And so the list of organizations, I think, is up. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see the recommendations. And the recommendations are actually in the USA Today article that's on your table. We worked with a group to help get those recommendations into that article, which I'm told has like 130 million views and growing. So we're getting the news out there. But this group came together. We used red, yellow, green. Green meaning these are policy recommendations and they're sort of integrated. They're not like one-offs that the green are really, they should all be considered together. But we have the highest confidence based on research, based on states that have already made these moves, that they are likely to help create the conditions for success. Yellow means promising, but there are a few things that you might need to be aware of if you're going to pursue this policy area. It doesn't mean don't do it. It just means be careful. Or, you know, it might require resources and other things that you just need to know about. And red means do not pursue these. The evidence does not suggest that they're worth it. I'll talk a little bit about them really briefly, but I would say, maybe to give you a little bit more hope, there are a number of states that are using this now, and I counted there's 10 states that either have moved or are moving math legislation through in their current legislative session. So I think we're going to see more states in your total soon. I know that Ohio is using this, Tennessee, Illinois, Alabama, which also helped inform them. New York, Kentucky, and DC are all, you know, taking action and using this in some way. And this session, we saw a movement in Florida, Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, North Carolina, Oklahoma, and Texas. So I'll talk a little bit about the recommendations, and I'll be really brief, but you can, I think the QR code is in the, on the slide. And we did these white labels, so there's no like Pi Network logo on this. We really wanted our members to be able to use these and adapt these and own them in the way that could be best and most helpful for them. So if you do go on and get it, please like make a copy, don't, edit the document. It's a Google Doc, and use them and adapt them. But, okay, so what's green? High quality instructional materials. I don't think I need to say that much to this group about that, but we just noted, like, there is no perfect list, but if a list helps folks not make bad decisions, that is a win. And some examples of states that have done this, and we link to those in the document, are Rhode Island, Mississippi, Alabama, and New York City, all either creating incentives or requirements or both to help folks move towards HQIM. The second is high quality curriculum-based professional development. The key is that it is directly related to the high quality instructional materials, hence the integration of all of these recommendations. And state incentives to use high quality providers, and some state guidance on how to build the structures or conditions to really support high quality professional learning. That can include lists of approved providers. There are other ways that states have done this. And some examples include Arkansas, Nebraska, and New York. The third is extended learning time. We talked about this a little bit already, but making sure that students who need it get the extra intervention and support through summer school, high quality tutoring. And there's very specific recommendations about the dosage, timing, and everything in the document. We know enough to be that specific about what the minimum requirements for tutoring should be. And some examples of states that have made policy moves on that include Tennessee and Louisiana. The fourth is auto-enrollment in advanced math classes. Again, all students, at least starting in middle school and each year afterwards, should have the opportunity to automatically enroll in advanced coursework, with parents having the opportunity to opt out to really ensure equity of access to those courses. Kentucky just passed a bill on this. Texas, Washington State, North Carolina, and Colorado have all made moves, and we're seeing this one spread very quickly. I think it's even mentioned in the article on your tables. And the fifth is, this gets a little spicy, is accountability for early educator prep programs on high quality math teaching. So states can set standards aligned to the research, use the prep provider review process to hold providers accountable, and adopt stronger licensure tests for math. Examples of states that are making moves on this include New Jersey, Arkansas, Massachusetts, New Mexico. And I thought I saw Valerie from Deans for Impact here. They've done a ton of work on this. She was here a minute ago. She's behind the pillar. There she is. They've done some work on this that can be really helpful. And the sixth, which is the last screen, is math coaches. Arun, you talked about this. We kind of went back and forth on this one because it's a very research-intensive piece, but the research was so clear that it's a really powerful lever for support. So it made it into green, and there's more details about the conditions needed to really make sure that's successful in the document. But states that have legislated this include Alabama, Kentucky, Utah. I can talk more about all of these things, but I'm trying to give you like the quick flavor. Yellow was a tough category for us, and Arun was part of the back and forth. There was like some heated debate on screeners, and we ended up putting it in yellow because we just didn't feel that the market was far enough along yet in terms of high quality screeners to say this was a clear green. If you want to go for it, proceed with caution on the quality of the market. And the second was, if a student is identified, we're not far along enough yet in our infrastructure to really support that student. Like, what do we do if that student's identified? Are they going to get the right interventions and support? So it's not a don't do it, but it is proceed with caution. And in particular, proceed with caution and watch closely how it's affecting students, and make sure that certain groups of students are not being disproportionately identified and impacted. Supplemental materials. That was also in yellow, partly because we knew we were making recommendations for states and state policymakers, and we just didn't feel like states had the capacity to develop high quality materials lists for supplementals because the market's so big, there's so many different kinds. It doesn't mean like it's not needed. I think it's really important, but at this moment, given what we know and given states' capacity, we just felt like if you needed to make choices and trade-offs, choose the green things, maybe get to this. And then I'll just very quickly say what's in red. Retention, lots of concerns about equity and disproportionate impact on that front, and very limited evidence that it's effective. Removing Algebra 1 from middle school, we're seeing like removing access to advanced coursework in some places in the name of equity that actually has the opposite effect. So we felt pretty strongly that that needed to be read. And then, I mean, duh for any of us who've been teachers, but no generic math PD. It needs to be curriculum aligned and high quality. And then I just want to say one other thing, which you didn't ask me to say, but I will say. So I'm a secondary English teacher by training, and I was one of those people who would say, math, I'm not a math person. And when I had my 2 daughters, I was like, this is not going to beat their fate. And so I really, I looked up, what are all the things that I need to do with them when they're little so that they will be math people? And I did all those things. And, once they got into school, there wasn't much I could really do for them because I knew if they were falling behind in reading. And I think a lot of parents are more comfortable understanding, their spidey sense is telling them something's wrong in reading. But it's much harder for parents to have a spidey sense about something being wrong in math, partly because we didn't have great math experiences ourselves and we're much less comfortable with the information. And so I think as we're having this conversation, that parent comfort and awareness piece is really, really critical. It's true in reading too, and we're not giving parents good information when their students are falling behind, but I think it's even more true in math and part of the thing we have to solve for.
You might have interviewed individual student math plans. Can you speak to that too?
Oh, that was yellow. Yeah, that was just because, thank you for saying that. Not that they aren't worth doing, but in many places it could be an exercise in compliance, not actually a high quality thing. Plus, students might also have IEPs and other things. You don't want them to have multiple plans.
And
Here you go.
From the district teacher perspective, a lot of times when someone develops an individual math plan, they think that means that they need to go back and remediate every grade level, every skill before that grade level. And a lot of students become even more marginalized because they never get to grade level content. At least in my 32 years experience, I've seen that. So.
One more thing I should have said right at the start is we know that policy is only the beginning, and there's so much work that has to be done on implementation. On literacy, we're doing a lot of work to support folks around implementation because the policy landscape is much further along. And so just have to say that as we're talking about policy recommendations, as all these states are trying to make moves, we really now need to make sure that what we intend in law is actually happening in schools and districts.
And Jen, I'm just looking at your list of green, and I have maybe just a follow-up for you and maybe anyone else who wants to answer this. Is there one of these that you feel like folks in the room, whether they are running edtech solutions, whether they are funders, whether they are policy advocacy organizations, where you feel like the momentum is ripe for more investment, for more coalition building, for more push at the legislative level, for more innovation and research? Is there one where you think we should be doing more action because the potential is just huge to disseminate across these other states that haven't yet done it? And anyone can answer that question.
Sure. I mean, I think a big area, and this talks to also the physical infrastructure, the human being infrastructure, is if we have those coaches, if we have the processes, what are the tools that they're going to use, right? What's the PD that they're going to get, specifically around kids that are falling behind? Like Tier 2 supports that are integrated into the Tier 1, I think is a big area of need that's much more common on the literacy side. And then PL that's very specifically focused and highlighting what happens when kids are falling behind and the types of supports that they need and the type of work that teachers are going to get in order to address their needs. I think those are 2 big areas.
I just want to add to what Arun is saying about the coaches. One of the other pieces, think about in the elementary classroom, a lot of the teachers are generalists. So some teachers are still what we call self-contained. They're teaching all 4 major content areas. So it's very difficult to become that specialist, become specialized in every content area. And especially if you've already have just some personal, dispositions about the content area already. one of the roles of a good math coach, math specialist, is also to be that support person for the staff. So that's someone, as Arun mentioned, what professional development pieces are you putting in place for that coach so that that person is not just someone who likes math, but someone who understands the dynamics of teaching math effectively and can actually help with the content, the pedagogy for the adults on that campus. And so that's part of that gap and that support that you provide as well. And we do have research and we have evidence of when we had widespread funding for those programs across our nation, that we saw more teachers actually providing those opportunities for their students. But when we took that support network away, we stopped building the capacity of having those people who could support teachers mathematically and help teachers to grow professionally as well.
I agree with everything that was just said, and I would say if we're talking to state policymakers, I'm pretty bullish on states using their power to influence decisions towards high-quality instructional materials. And I keep hearing throughout the whole conference that we place a ridiculous amount of expectations on individual teachers to make decisions about curricula that does not have to be this way. And that is both a cultural shift in terms of changing the expectation about what it means to be a teacher, I think, and using the policy levers, whether that's like at a city level, like in New York City, or at a state level. That is an appropriate role for policymakers to try to create incentives and conditions to move us towards a different space.
And I just want to add to that point, which is that, yes, high-quality instructional materials are absolutely necessary, but they are absolutely not sufficient. And one of the things that we really see is one of the primary challenges with districts adopting high-quality instructional materials is understanding what they're really taking on and planning and preparing for it and supporting teachers in the transitions that are expected to teach differently. Without that implementation and that intentionality around implementation and the investment in teachers and coaches and school leaders, we need at every level in the school system, to understand how they're moving and need to be aligned. So high quality instructional materials do not teach themselves. Teachers teach students, and that's where we need to focus, is on instruction. So yes, and.
Don't make us choose one.
It sounds like there's a lot here that we need to focus on, not just one. I actually have one question left. And then I want to turn over the audience, but I wanted to see which one is more interesting to the audience. So I had two questions prepared for this group. One was on the role of Gen AI in math education. So we have a question on that. Or we could ask a question around data science and whether this should be replacing, maybe, advanced algebra and calculus as an alternative pathway for students. If you're more interested in the Gen AI question, please raise your hand. If you're more interested in the data science question, please raise your hand. Okay. I'm gonna go with the. Do you guys have a preference?
Ask them both.
Why don't I like that idea? Why don't we give both, and then you can choose which one you're more comfortable answering. So, question number one is, does Gen AI have a role in math education? If so, what does it look like? We're doing a lot of this work at NewSchools, so I'm particularly interested in your answer. And then two, we are in California, which has been doing on the leading edge of implementing data science to the chagrin of some people who believe that advanced algebra and calculus should remain at the secondary level in high schools. Does data science need to be taught in high schools? And anyone can go first.
Okay. So remember all those structures that I talked about that exist in the elementary school level, and as you go up the grades, and how we need to create some of the structures for math that we have on the literacy side? Well, we have an extraordinary opportunity to do that from the ground up, and it would be foolish of us not to actually think about how Gen AI actually helps us create new structures. And by that, I mean, like, what does professional learning look like, right? Like, think about a lot of the existing professional learning that's provided. A lot of it is asynchronous or partially synchronous. A lot of that could be considerably better through the use of Gen AI. Even the PL that's delivered, the type of insights that you get back from students, that could be a lot better using Gen AI to see where kids are, in their, learning progression, their trajectory. For us, it has been an extraordinary boon. At PowerMyLearning, we have a very unique database of students talking about how they learned a math concept, right? It's videos of students. When we provide these videos, and some of them are coming from parents that take videos of the kids after they, did an activity and they're explaining what they just learned. We're doing this in classrooms, but the students are explaining. A teacher can't always just analyze 20 videos by themselves. Gen AI can actually analyze those videos, extract from them insights that are helpful for teachers' pedagogy, and then connect them to the HQIM. And all of this has only been possible over the last 7 months. So again, I think we need to start thinking about this from every level of the supports that we're trying to construct, and it's an extraordinary opportunity.
Yeah, I want to build on that because I think one of the things, there's a lot of AI slop out there. And one of the problems is that what AI does is it is a very good mimicker. And so if it's trained on data that has a lot of confusing, conflicting information, you're going to get a lot of junk out. On the other hand, the promise of AI right now with current AI technology is around things that we actually have very good ideas about how it works, but it's complex or expensive to assess or to build the expertise. And I think, I was talked earlier about early number understanding. We know a lot about how young children learn mathematics and understand numbers, but it takes a lot of training for teachers to recognize the stages and to understand what steps to do. This is actually something that AI is very well positioned to do, especially if we think of it as a help for teachers, an enhancement to teaching, because teaching is fundamentally a human endeavor, and AI should be there to support and enable better teaching, but it can't replace it. So I think that's one of the things that we need to be very careful about, is understanding where the promise is and where the true risks are. But one of the things about IM is we have an open education resource curriculum. And so a lot of people do a lot of things with it. And it's pretty amazing to see the wide range of things that people do. And we see the full gamut. We see some incredibly interesting, cool things that they're doing with AI, very innovative. And then we see some pretty scary stuff out there. So without proper guardrails, we can get in a lot of trouble. But if we are thoughtful and careful about how we do it, there's, I think, incredible promise. I agree.
I'll go to the data science question. I want to avoid that one, but I definitely agree with what my colleagues on this panel have said about AI. We just have to remember, the more we as adults learn about AI and how it works and what it can and cannot do, we're better positioned to use it more productively for teachers to learn and for students as well. So when we talk about the whole issue with data science and throwing out some things and replacement, why do we have to get rid of advanced algebra or calculus or anything like that? It's about choices. There are some students, their trajectory leads them to needing or wanting those courses. But also, let's look at the world we live in. Our students are being required on almost every type of profession they choose to be connoisseurs of data. We don't need to just have data science in high school. We need data literacy pre-K-12. And so it's very important that we provide those opportunities for our students and for our teachers so that we see how it's connected. It's actually, in the early grades, it's intertwined with some of the other content that you learn in mathematics. And so if anyone who's ever taught at the lower elementary grades, and you take a look at the things that you do in early number, you actually use those and apply those concepts when you analyze data. So it really only helps a student to be a stronger mathematics student or mathematician, as we tell them. And so it is our job to provide students with the opportunities they need to feel success, to make sense of what they're doing and to see relevance. And if the world that they live in requires them to be able to use particular skills and concepts, we have to make sure we provide them with those opportunities. So it needs to be interwoven between the things that they're doing in mathematics. And as they get older and become more specialized, students may choose data science as a course in high school. But it doesn't mean that it's a lower level course. It doesn't mean that it has to be substituted. And so we're finding that even some college admissions officers are looking for students who have that background, depending on what they want to pursue as a career or they think about for college. So we have to open the door and expand those opportunities for our students. And I'm going to wrap it up. One of the things we noticed, one of my colleagues and I, we just did like a, I guess, an informal research study where we looked at high school course offerings and we looked at each content area. And surprisingly, out of literacy, math, science, and social studies, math had the fewest number of choices of courses for students. Why should that be? There's so much mathematics in the world. So I don't think we're throwing one out than the other, but I do think we're doing our students a disservice if we don't provide them with those opportunities so that they are ready. And workforce is asking us to make sure that students have those skills. That's one of the things we're being asked to do.
So I'll just very quickly say two quick things. Totally agree. And I have 2 high school age students. The happy ending to my story about my determination for their math experience to be different is I think both are headed into STEM fields. So I'm very excited about that. One's going off to college to study chemistry and environmental science. And I wouldn't want either of my kids to have to choose between one or the other and want them to have the opportunity to do both. And so I think we should try to reject the either or. And I'll just say one quick thing on AI that I've really been noodling on. I totally agree with all the comments that have been made earlier. It's a support for learning. Students are going to use it anyway, so we might as well figure out how to bring it into the classroom and incorporate it. And just because I'm in a room of innovators, one of the things that's really been worrying me and that I've been thinking about is I think a lot of you all that are entrepreneurs that are developing really interesting AI platforms are going to start to gather, you probably already have, some really interesting data about how students learn. That really, we haven't created a lot of incentives for you to share with the rest of us. And so that's just something that I'll plant a seed. I don't know the answer to, but I've really been thinking about what is the knowledge that's being gathered now that's different than the knowledge that we had before, and how can we use that to inform the broader field versus just one organization's market interests.
Fantastic. We have time for 2 questions. And so if you do have a question, I'm actually going to take both of them now, and I'm going to ask my panelists to please keep your brilliance brief so that we can try to get through all of them. I'll take one from this gentleman over here, and then one from this side. Yes, this gentleman right here.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a question, and thank you for the panel for your insight so far. My question is about out-of-school math time, opportunities for out-of-school math instruction and innovative ways. And this is totally out of left field. The pun is coming later. But I coach baseball, and we instituted math as our foundation for this baseball, because baseball is nothing but math. And I don't want to be in the red or the yellow in these out-of-school interventions or clash with what's going on in the classrooms. So I just want to know if you had examples of complementary out-of-school math instruction, math programs, things like that could support this whole discussion about the state of math.
Thank you. And then the second question?
There seems to be a consensus forming among reform math educators, about the importance of productive struggle and taking a problem-based approach and letting kids sort of wrestle with something before you give them the answer. And I think there's probably consensus in here that seems right. When I talk to teachers, especially in a big urban district, I hear a lot of, not for my kids. And I'm curious how you respond when you hear that.
Go ahead.
Okay. I will answer that one because I taught in what is classified as an urban school district. And my first question is, why not? Every child has the opportunity to experience high quality mathematics instruction. Part of that is being able to problem solve, having the opportunity to reason and use critical thinking. And when I do the thinking for you, they're not learning. And so it's a systemic problem because probably maybe there's someone who's at middle grades or at high school, and so their students year after year after year have experienced what I would qualify as inferior instruction where they weren't allowed to do that, so they think that they can't. It is a little bit harder for the teacher. You know, you have to sometimes pause and not talk and be the listener and collect notes, but I have seen children at all different levels, and I have yet to meet a child who does not thrive and on that success when they actually arrive at the answer and do it themselves. And in the real world, who's going to do the thinking for them?
Thanks, Latrenda. Does maybe time for one more response?
Just really quick. We see this issue all of the time, and one of the things that we've learned is the most powerful thing that persuades educators that their students can is to see it for themselves. A lot of times they'll see a video and they're like, well, those kids can do it, but my kids can't. And so we've ourselves done what we call math labs, where teachers can come in and observe another teacher teaching. You know, there are a whole lot of potential structures that you can do to bring the reality of what students are capable of. Like, that's the most powerful thing. And like, we even have some teachers who just try, like, finally give in and try one of the instructional routines, and their kids are talking, and they're like, I didn't even know that student had a voice, right? So I don't think there's anything to replace seeing it for yourself. And this is a broad, across-the-board issue that we actually have some insights on how we can address it.
One quick thing, too, and it's to the gentleman about baseball and math. Well, but math and baseball are intimately entwined, right? I mean, we have advanced statistics. And I think that gets to this notion that's present in reading, coming back to the reading. Every child, 15 minutes of reading at home, and that's a recommendation from pediatricians. I think we should get to the world where there's 15 minutes of math at home, you know, where we think about math being everywhere, right? That is a fundamental cultural shift that if we got to, we could get to the same place that reading's been.
Just very quickly, I wish I had a better answer for you, but I would just say one of the things that I think is really exciting about big districts that are moving towards more coherence around what their curriculum is, what offers new opportunities for community partners to hook into that and provide supports that are aligned in ways that, like, that opportunity didn't exist before because there wasn't coherence across the district. So figure out what's happening where you're working and find ways to support it.
Fantastic. Jen, Latrenda, Kristen, Arun, thank you so much for being here. And will you please join me in thanking them for their insights?